All right, everybody, the time has come. Let's talk about what's in a WWE contract. Now, we're not going to talk about pay in this video because that can be an entire video on its own. So, we'll talk about what kinds of things are in the contract and how WWE treats its talent. In every WWE contract, there's likely to be a section about booking, which means how they would book that wrestler. So the contract says that WWE owns the wrestler's intellectual property, and basically they have the sole discretion as to how the wrestler is booked in any medium or any manner. Also, WWE will have the right to use any footage they record of you in perpetuity in any manner they seem fit. They could edit it, reconfigure it, do anything they like with it in perpetuities. That means forever. What's interesting is with the advancement of AI, having a clause like this in the contract can allow for any number of things. I can't even imagine, the possibilities that they could come up with now with AI, which means like once a performer stops wrestling for WWE, if you think about it, you could create some AI model and have whoever your favorite wrestlers, keep him in his prime and have him wrestle for years. And it would be just like the guy was still on TV. Who knows? So I would imagine that all contracts since at least 2023 likely have an AI provision in it. So I would very likely think that's in all the WWE contracts. Also, any materials or props, championship belts, titles, King of the Ring, Queen of the Ring, crowns, anything like that, all of those are owned by WWE, by the production company. I know we've talked a lot about this, like, for example, if Bret Hart would have taken the WWE Championship belt with him, on the Montreal Screwjob, what would have happened? But actually, that is owned by the company. It is a prop. It's like if I go and do a movie, I can't then take my character's wardrobe with me. No, I'm going to take this with. No, that belongs to the production, to the company. So it's interesting because sometimes you'll see WWE wrestlers or former WWE wrestlers show up at other promotions and they may be carrying WWE Championship belts, and you wonder how they can do this. Well, these are not WWE's property because they're technically replica belts. Like when you win a WWE Championship, you have the TV titles, you have the live event titles you take around, but once you lose those, it goes on to the next person and they hold them. But then you do get a copy, like a replica belt of your own to keep as memento, which is really cool. And so that's what people keep. That's what you hang on the walls and whatnot. But that's what you could show up at another company with. But really, that's just a product. That is not the actual WWE title belt or championship, whatever you want to call it. As you can see in my background, I have 2 tag team championship title belts hanging there. That's because I won it twice. So each replica represents each title reign. So WWE owns any IP that the wrestler creates, which this is entitled works. So any work or creative work that the wrestler comes up with, WWE technically owns. And an example of this is after Brock Lesnar left WWE, he wanted to use his F5, but he couldn't call it the F5 because technically WWE owned it. So a little known fact is at this time, Brock Lesnar called it the verdict, which was kind of an FU to WWE in the legal battle. But also, I didn't know that he was using the verdict before me. It's pretty cool. There's also going to be a part in there concerning your works in that any work that you create during your time at WWE is going to be considered a work made for hire, which means they own it. So an example of this would be, let's say I came up with a really cool nickname for myself, a whole gimmick, a nickname, I don't know, a gesture, a hand gesture, my own emblem, logo, whatever it is, they would own that. They would own all of that. Even though I came up with it entirely on my own, They would own every last bit of that. So getting into intellectual property, WWE owns your name, your likeness, any ring names. However, this is different because being me, not being a lawyer, I wanted to own David Otunga. I wanted to use David Otunga. So I have an exclusion there. However, WWE does own my likeness, David Otunga, as it pertains to wrestling. They likely have a part about merchandising as well, where basically they can act on behalf of the wrestler as an attorney in fact and copyright anything they choose. If they come up with a slogan for you, a nickname, whatever it is, they can go ahead and just copyright that. The contract is also very likely to have somewhat of a sell-off period where they have a certain amount of time to sell off whatever leftover merchandise they have for you, t-shirts, hats, you name it. And once that sell-off period is over, there's nothing to stop them from printing more merchandise and selling. So it's just, it's interesting, but they can just keep doing this in perpetuity anyway. So technically, they can't do that for me, and they likely wouldn't do that for anyone else. For example, Rich Holland. They're probably not going to reprint more of his merch, and whatever they have left, they're likely selling it off on clearance right now. Also, WWE controls if you get large opportunities like, say, a book. Let's say you got a book deal during the time you work there. They would have rights to that. So hopefully, hopefully not, but what if the most interesting time in your life happens there? Well, you work for them, then they technically own the rights to that if it's during that term. So, and when it comes to the book rights, they would have an unconditional and exclusive right to your book. So technically, if they wanted to, they could have written an unauthorized David Otunga biography. However, they could have only done this while they worked there during the term. So also, when you're under a WWE contract, you're very, very likely exclusive to WWE, which means you can't work anywhere else without their permission. And in the event that they happen to grant you that permission, you have to give them a 10% fee, kind of like a management fee or a booking fee for them allowing you to work somewhere else at the same time. And depending on what that project is, it could be more, could be way more than 10%, who knows? And whatever money that you do earn, that's ultimately going to go against your downside guarantee for the year. So that's less money that they would have to pay you. And then when it comes to payment, it's up to the company's discretion how much they pay you per appearance. And I don't know how they figure it out. I don't know who's doing the math over there. I don't know if they're reading tea leaves, but it varies because let's think about it. Who determines where you go on the card? Well, if it's a live event, it's the agents that week. So then they're, I guess, determining how much money you make. But, then it's like, well, how do you determine which wrestler had the biggest draw or who most of the fans were there to see? Okay, yeah, likely if John Cena's on the card, okay, it's going to be him. But how much is that? So you can't just give him 95%. How do you weigh that versus somebody who's in the opening match? But anyway, it's at their sole discretion, and this kind of makes me wonder, whose discretion is that really? Who's in charge of this? Another interesting part that is usually always included in a WWE contract is that each performer is responsible for his or her own maintenance and keeping up with their health, appearance, and professional wrestling skills, which I think is amazing. But it's actually in your contract. You have to keep up with yourself, and you have to keep up with your wrestling skills. You can't just sign a contract and that you're just gonna get by and forget about everything. You can't let yourself go. But I think it's wild you have to put that in here because that should go without saying clearly. But likely, I mean, that's in most contracts. Now, in every WWE contract, there's likely a clause that each wrestler has to take every precaution possible to be safe and avoid injury, either to themselves or to others. But that is something that is in absolutely every one of the WWE contracts. And then there's a clause about promotion where basically a wrestler must promote, WWE events, pay-per-views, and you're not going to be compensated extra for that. That's part of the deal. For example, during the launch of NXT, I was the face of that, and I was flown all around promoting the NXT show, but I wasn't paid extra for that. It's built into the gig. However, this isn't so dissimilar from Hollywood. That happens too. A lot of times if you're in a movie, I've been in a movie before and then had to go promote that as well. And that was tied into it. So you have to have a different contract in order to be paid for those promotional appearances. So one thing the contracts generally include is something about insurance. Now, I remember when I first started, it said that I was responsible for getting my own medical and health insurance. And then at some point it changed to I was then required to have my own health and medical insurance, which just as interesting if I'm an independent contractor, because one, they're not providing insurance, obviously, but then now it would be mandating that I must get and retain health insurance on my own. And then every contract also likely has a waiver where you discharge the promoter from any liability whatsoever, injury, death, anything. Whatever happens, the promoter is not liable, not responsible. And that's going to be in every contract. And just as the wrestler acknowledges that the company is not responsible for any injuries, you're also not entitled to any workers' compensation claims as well. So if you're injured at WWE, you're not eligible for workers' compensation claims. And there's generally going to be a morals clause where at all times you must act with due regard for public morals and moral turpitude. What are we talking about here? Where's the line on that? On moral turpitude, because wrestlers are known to be a pretty wild bunch. So I guess that's not enforced too strictly. I mean, I wonder if Ric Flair signed this same contract. So also in wrestling contracts, if a wrestler is injured and they're out for more than 6 weeks, they can start losing pay. It can be a bad thing. In fact, you can be terminated for that, just for being injured longer than 6 weeks. And this is what they mean when you hear people talk about like injury rollover at AEW, where they take the time that you were out injured and tack that on to your contract. So it's time where your contract actually is then longer. If it was 36 months and then you were out 6 months injured, it now becomes 42 months. And in any wrestling contract, there's the termination. And in most of these, it's for any or no reason at all. They can terminate you. All they have to do is give you 90 days written notice. But they can literally terminate you for any reason or not even having a reason. They just felt like it. So hypothetically, a wrestler could book a movie. They take 20% of that. You come back and they don't use you for 6 weeks and just terminate you if they want. That's it. No reason at all. And then in every contract is going to be the non-compete clause. Now, I've done an entire video about this, but in these contracts, there's always been a 1-year non-compete where the performer cannot go to a rival company anywhere within the United States for a period of 1 year, and they're not paid. But as I've said in my videos, typically what they do is they just give you 90 days and they still pay you. And then the non-compete is over in 90 days. So that's traditionally what's happened in practice. And then in the WWE contract, there's likely going to be a part where the wrestler agrees that they are an independent contractor and not an employee. So generally, there's some part in it, some kind of acknowledgement by the performer that they are an independent contractor. And as I've mentioned in multiple videos, it just doesn't seem like a judge would uphold this. So that's how WWE can treat talent under a contract. And I'm going to make a later video about how WWE can pay its talent under WWE contracts. So let me know what you thought of this. Leave your comments below. And yeah, thanks for joining me.